statement with a massive donation of vaccines to fight the global pandemic. Vaccinate children, a critical meeting today, could provide answers on how we vaccinate one of the last groups vulnerable to the virus. We start now with a focus overseas. President Biden is in England. He's meeting right now with Prime Minister Boris Johnson. They're expected to announce a new Atlantic charter, strengthening the alliance between the two countries as President Biden pushes to reset relationships in the post-Trump era. You can see just moments ago video from their meeting. President Biden began his trip vowing to stand up to adversaries, delivering this blunt message to Vladimir Putin ahead of their high-stakes meeting.
I'm heading to the G7, then to the NATO ministerial, and then to meet with Mr. Putin to let him know what I want him to know.
President Biden is also expected to make a major announcement that the United States will be buying 500 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine to share with countries around the world. So there's a lot going on. Let's get started with CNN's Jeff Zeleny traveling with the president. He is in England. Jeff, the tape was just coming in on that first, well, before cameras, sit down between the two leaders. What happened?
Well, Kate, we are getting our first look at this really first face-to-face meeting with President Biden and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. We saw them meeting one another outside on the ocean's edge and then walking into that private meeting, which is underway right now. Our cameras did get a look at the early bits of conversations between the two of them. Let's listen to that and talk in a moment.
It's a great pleasure, Mr. President, to welcome you to Cornwall.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Fantastic to see you. You know, what I think is your first big overseas trip since you've been.
It is.
Since you've been president.
I've been to a great country many times, but this is the first time as president of the United States.
Well, everybody's absolutely thrilled to see you.
We're thrilled to be here. Thrilled to meet your wife.
Yes, and they've gone off to do something else.
They did. I told the Prime Minister we have something in common. We both married way above our station.
I'm not going to dissent from that one. But I'm not going to disagree with the president there, or indeed on anything else. I think highly likely.
So a very light conversation there, but interesting. At the end of that, Prime Minister Johnson said, "I'm not going to disagree with that." President Biden was complimenting his wife, but also said, I'm not going to disagree with anything else as well. We do know that they are actually having a very substantive conversation right now. Several things are on the agenda between the two of them. One, of course, are the travel restrictions that have been in place between both countries. There's going to be a discussion about eventually and swiftly, in the eyes of both countries, changing and easing restrictions so travel can open up. Also talking about Brexit. The situation in Northern Ireland, President Biden not pleased with the Prime Minister's view on Brexit, and of course discussing democracy and really strengthening the alliance. Kate, what is so interesting about this is that Boris Johnson, as we all know, was a key ally to former President Donald Trump. They met on several occasions during the campaign. President Biden referred to Boris Johnson as a clone of Donald Trump. The bygones are bygones. This is a new relationship being reset as presidents and prime ministers do. So certainly they have many reasons to work together and reform that alliance that really had frayed over the last 4 years during the Trump era. It's in both of their interests to do it. So yes, some challenging conversations ahead, but certainly talking about that special relationship, as well as signing, we're going to get a look at the end of their meeting, the new signed Atlantic Charter. What that is a modern-day version, both signing this 80-year-old document that FDR and Winston Churchill signed back in 1941. Kate?
Jeff, thank you so much for that. Joining me now, where more, is CNN senior political correspondent, anchor of Inside Politics Sunday, Abby Phillip, and Josh Rogan, CNN political analyst and columnist for The Washington Post. Abby, a safe place always to be when before cameras is talking about the weather and definitely always talking about family, a place that Biden does like to be. And look, traditionally these meetings before the cameras are choreographed and somewhat predictable. But what do you think this meeting between these two leaders means, as Jeff was getting to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as Jeff said, you kind of let bygones be bygones. There is a sense that both men are ready to start fresh with their relationship. And it's been interesting to see Boris Johnson really shifting his approach in the post-Trump era to embrace Biden. And he embraced Biden pretty quickly after Biden was elected president, even in spite of all the controversy happening domestically here in the United States. And it seemed to suggest that, at least from Johnson's perspective, he welcomes this opportunity to truly strengthen the UK-US relationship and the partnership and the reliance on each other that's necessary in order to rebuild some of these global institutions that have been really shaken in the last 4 years by a desire under the Trump era to either reshape them, to perhaps dissolve them altogether. Boris Johnson may be further right than obviously Joe Biden is, but he clearly wants that longstanding partnership to be as strong as it has been in the decades prior to the last 4 or 5 years, but in particular.
Yeah, and Josh, I mean, the reason they're talking about let bygones be bygones is in 2019, Biden once called Johnson a physical and emotional clone of Donald Trump. I mean, that is not a compliment if you needed any further description of it. And since then, I will say, Johnson's made clear that even on, I would say kind of a small thing, but maybe not, because not in his mind, he has this distaste for the term special relationship between the U.S. and the UK. Biden's team has used that term often, Josh, and even in recent days. I'm just kind of thinking of this and wondering what is going on behind the scenes. How does this dynamic, or what was in the past, impact what they're working toward?
Right. Well, we have to remember that, Boris Johnson wasn't just representing himself. He was representing a movement in England and in Europe and in America, a nationalist, populist movement that was set against the thing that Biden and most other American leaders have been pushing for all of these years, which is a multilateral international world order based on globalization and all the rest. And Johnson is practical enough to realize that Biden's president now, but he's also smart enough to know that in 4 years from now, we could have another shift back to Trump or a Trump-like figure. So he's playing it cool, and he knows that the U.S.-UK relationship is too important to really mess with too much. But, the big question will be what happens when Biden and Johnson get before the other G7 leaders, because they're the ones who were really abused by Trump. They're the ones who've had tariffs and trade restrictions placed on them by the Trump administration that they want to get rid of right now. And they're the ones who are really looking for Biden to say, no, we're not going to head towards nativism and populism and nationalism. We're going to reinstitute internationalism as the guiding force. And can Biden do that? We don't know. Or is Johnson going to go along with that? We don't know. And will the Europeans believe that the Biden administration, when it says America's back, are we back? I think that remains to be seen.
Let me bring in CNN's Nick Robertson as well, as he's been watching all of this play out. Nick, just your reaction to kind of what this moment is, the face-to-face between the leaders, and kind of what's the most you think can come, that you think is going to come out of this meeting?
Look, Boris Johnson desperately wants to be liked by President Biden. He desperately wants the relationship to be a good one. He desperately wants the trade relationship with the United States that's positive and beneficial to the UK as well as the US. And that really, could hit a potential stumbling block over Boris Johnson's post-Brexit wrangling with the European Union over Ireland, over what's known as the Northern Irish protocols, that President Biden doesn't take Boris Johnson's side. He takes the European Union Irish side. So there's a potential point of conflict there. Look, a huge amount of pressure on them. President Biden's first overseas trip, Boris Johnson's kind of scores a coup, being the first international leader that meets the new U.S. president, on his soil overseas. That's important. And a lot of, the cameras pointing, the reporters all there watching the president, the first lady, Boris Johnson, his new wife, Carrie Johnson, looking out over the beautiful, idyllic sandy beach in a beautiful British cove, place most people go to relax and enjoy. And they've got the world's media looking at them, screaming questions at them. And what happens? What happens? Well, Joe Biden says to Boris Johnson, I think we both married up. And Boris Johnson responds, I'm not going to disagree with you on that one, and I'm not going to disagree with you on anything. And I think that underlines and underpins how much Boris Johnson wants to get on well with President Biden, and how much he wants the relationship to succeed. Because, in essence, that's who Boris Johnson is. He likes to be liked by everyone. People say that is a fault. He wants to be on the global stage. He wants to be a good actor. He wants to be perceived as doing the right things, helping women's education in developing countries, helping get COVID vaccines around the world, helping deliver a more sustainable, climate, a more sustainable growth on the planet that looks after and takes care of climate change, all of those things. And I think that's what we saw on the seafront today. A new, if you will, Prime Minister wanting desperately to get on with a new president who is a hugely experienced political operator.
And this is just the first stop of what is multiple stops and very important meetings ahead. Nick, thank you so much. Abby, Josh, thank you guys as always. All of it culminating with a very different type of meeting, this face-to-face between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin next week. Much more to come on that. Also ahead for us, while President Biden meets with world leaders overseas, his domestic agenda at the moment is all but stalled. And now, new pressure from Democrats on their Democratic leaders to cut off talks and go it alone. Plus, the TSA is so... At this hour, we're keeping a close eye on Capitol Hill, where FBI Director Christopher Wray is testifying before a House committee. He's giving his first public comments since the release of the Senate report on the January 6th insurrection and the security failures surrounding it. CNN's Jessica Schneider is joining us now with more on this. Jessica, what did the FBI Director say about it?
Yeah, Kate, the FBI director currently facing a lot of tough questioning, not just from Democrats, also Republicans. And he is saying that he and the rest of the leaders at the FBI are outraged about what happened on January 6th, and they're determined not to let it happen again. And just in the past few minutes, the Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, she asked Director Wray specifically this. Are the words that former President Trump used before January 6th that many people have said helped incite the riot and the attack on the Capitol, are those words at all being reviewed by the Department of Justice? Are they being referred to the Department of Justice for an investigation? Director Wray said that he is not aware of any investigation into that specifically. So that was just in the last few minutes. But Director Wray has spoken more broadly about the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, saying that it was motivated by extremist ideologies. And he says that the FBI and the Department of Justice have done a lot in the past few months, referencing the more than 500 arrests that they've made. We've reported on that extensively. Here's a little bit more of what Director Wray had to say.
As you could imagine, we are just as outraged by what happened on January 6th and just as determined to do our part to make sure that never happens again. Now, the Norfolk report that you referenced was a specific piece of raw, unverified intelligence that emerged on January 5th, the day before, from a source online, unvetted, and despite the raw nature of it, it was quickly passed, not one, not two, but three different ways, to the Capitol Police.
And Director Wray has made that point before, that this intelligence was passed on to all law enforcement agencies in multiple ways. They knew that this possibility was out there. And Kate, there's been a lot of criticism as to why these agencies, in particular the Capitol Police, were not more properly prepared. Kate?
That's right. Jessica, thank you very much. Also happening on the Hill, key elements of the president's domestic agenda are in danger of falling by the wayside as it is running into a wall of Republican resistance. That's just the math on Capitol Hill right now. Bipartisan negotiations on the massive infrastructure plan collapsed earlier this week, though the White House says it is still holding out hope for another bipartisan deal to take shape. But that's not all. Police reform, voting rights protections, they're also facing major hurdles right now. So is there a path to the president's desk for any of his priorities at the moment? CNN's Manu Raji, who's joining me now also on Capitol Hill. Manu, you're tracking all of this. What is your gut check on where things are headed?
Well, it's going to be very difficult to get most of those items that you listed through the finish line here. There just simply are not the votes for a number of key items on Joe Biden's agenda, perhaps on the issue of overhauling police practices in this country. There could be a deal, but Tim Scott, the lead Republican negotiator, made clear today there won't be a deal this week. If there's anything potentially next week, and there's still some differences they need to bridge there. But on infrastructure, which is the central piece of Joe Biden's agenda, what happens there is a big question, because there are those bipartisan negotiations that are happening, but there is major skepticism within the ranks on both sides that a deal could ultimately be reached. And there's also concern, particularly within the Senate Democratic caucus, that there's the effort to negotiate with Republicans, in their view, is fruitless, and they say essentially pull the plug and try to move a bill along straight party lines. But talking to the key negotiators, the Democratic negotiators who are part of that group today, they're urging their caucus to be patient. Would you be open to going reconciliation if this doesn't play out?
Well, I don't want to cross that bridge until we come to it. I think the country needs a major infrastructure upgrade. I don't think there's much doubt about that. I say let's give it a little more time.
I'm not interested in putting a time limit on it. I'm interested in trying to get agreement.
So Jean Shaheen there made clear to me, I asked her, do you support going this budget route? It's called budget reconciliation, to pass a bill along straight party lines, an infrastructure package. She said, we do not have the votes to do that right now. So that is the challenge for the Democrats. There are concerns about these bipartisan talks, and there's also concerns they don't have the votes to go it alone, which could leave a key element of Joe Biden's agenda by the wayside.
Which means something's got to give if it is just as you lay out, Manu. Great reporting. Thank you as always. Joining me right now for more on this is Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California. He sits on the very critical House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure as we talk about this. Thanks for being here. I want to quickly play for you. You heard Jean Shaheen say, I don't want to put a timeline on this, but we have heard people setting something of timelines and deadlines of when there needs to be some forward motion. And it's getting a little confusing to me. I want to play for you what Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg told Wolf Blitzer yesterday, essentially saying that you all have all summer to get this done.
It really follows the legislative calendar, right? Even today in the House, they were doing a committee markup on a piece of our transportation policy. I think I've heard Leader Schumer say that July is when they want to take a lot of this up in the Senate. It really has to be this summer.
This summer is long, thankfully. I love summer. But that is not what the Commerce Secretary suggested to me, Congressman, just a few days ago.
Well, we do have.
I'm sorry, Congressman. Listen, let me play Gina Raimondo for you. I'm so sorry.
Sure.
If this stretches into July, is it gone too far?
Probably. You know, it depends. It's hard to say. It depends where we are. But, you know, he said Memorial Day. They asked for a bit more time. He's giving them a bit more time. I think we want to get something done far sooner than July.
Where are you on this?
We are in process of moving pieces of legislation around. Last night or yesterday, we spent 19 hours marking up the surface transportation bill. Unfortunately, at the end of that entire process, not one Republican voted for it. That's a pretty clear sign of where the Republicans are going. They just simply don't want anything to do with climate change. They don't want to put more than just a few additional dollars into the surface transportation. We also marked up the Clean Water Act. Again, not one Republican voted to upgrade our sanitation systems around the nation. But this is a process. This is step one. The next step will be that legislation will eventually go to the Rules Committee and to the floor, and I would expect that to be done by the end of, certainly by the end of July, maybe early July. Other pieces of legislation are moving around. The Senate voted out $125 billion of new money for a critical piece of the infrastructure. That's the research and the manufacturing technology that we need on that piece of it. That was a bipartisan piece. So the pieces are coming together. We should have most of this on the floor of the House in July, and then the final negotiations in August, early September. I think we're going to be online to get it done. Will there be Republican support? Not at the moment, but we're not
and
more
that's
than
it.
a quarter of the way through.
And that's it. And the details matter because obviously the detail of every bill matters. But what also matters is the broad picture, which is what you just said. You don't have any Republican support right now. And that's in the House where you guys do have the numbers. In the Senate, you can't move on anything unless you've got at least 10 Republican support. And that's what Chris Van Hollen is saying. He said last night, he says his time has already run out for negotiating, and Democrats need to figure out a way to go it alone. Are you in that place as well? Because, as you said, you're not winning Republicans over, and bipartisan agreements, bipartisan negotiations have shown no fruit.
Plan A, I just described to you. Plan B is also underway. A new budget is now being written in the House of Representatives. That should be on the floor during the month of June. That then sets the stage for reconciliation. The Republicans are going to have to make a choice. They're either going to seriously negotiate, which they are not now doing in my estimation, or face a reconciliation process. We would much prefer to have Republican votes, but yesterday was very, very disappointing. No, they don't want anything to do with climate change. They don't want anything to do with the electrical grid. They don't want anything to do with moving with enough money to actually build the surface transportation, trains, bridges, highways, and the rest. It was very, very disappointing, but an awful lot of talking points. We spent nearly 2 hours talking about defunding the police. What that has to do with this was beyond anybody's estimation other than the Republicans wanting a talking point.
So just my knowledge of Capitol Hill, your far more extensive knowledge of Capitol Hill, I'm getting the sense that if this stretches into, if we're still talking infrastructure come August and into September, that's probably not surprising with the process that you're laying out right now.
Well, what we'll be talking about is moving forward to getting the job done. We'll either do it with a piece of legislation through the normal order, and we can do that in the House of Representatives. We do have the 50%, more than 50% vote. We will do that in the House of Representatives. It'll be all that is in the president's plan. It'll have all of the pieces, including broadband. For the life of me, I don't understand why Republicans in the Midwest, in rural areas, don't want broadband. But in any case, we will do that. And then we will also have a plan B. If the Republicans simply refuse to go along in the Senate or somehow stall us in the House, we can do reconciliation. And now, we must.
Congressman, I do want to ask you on another topic because it's just happening this morning. Sure. A group of Jewish Democratic members have just put out a letter condemning comments by fellow Democratic member Ilhan Omar. We'll put up what she tweeted because that is at the crux of what I'm talking about. She tweeted the following, that we have seen unthinkable atrocities committed by the U.S., Hamas, Israel, Afghanistan, and the Taliban. And fellow Democrats are now asking for her to clarify for what they call offensive and misguided remarks equating the U.S. and Israel to, terrorist organizations. What is your reaction to her words?
I think she needs to be much more careful. I don't think she ever intended to lump the United States and Israel into the same terrorism that was being conducted by those terrorist organizations. She ought to walk it back. She ought to be very, very careful here. The problem is that this kind of language incites violence here in the United States. We've seen too much of that. The Jewish community has been affected by that. And we need to really tamp this down. We need to be very measured in our conversations here. There's a lot of emotion in play, understandably so. But be very, very careful, all of us, in all that we say.
Yeah, this gets into that realm of should she or should someone apologize for something? Does that matter to you here? Do you think you would look for an apology for what she said?
The word apology can mean many, many things. It can be, I'm sorry, or it can be what I really meant to say is the following. I would hope that she does clarify what was in that tweet. One of the things that I've learned and occasionally forget is be careful with what you email or what you tweet. The E in email is for evidence. So we ought to be very, very careful how we use these platforms, because they can be they can incite trouble. And as we saw with the president, both his rhetoric and his tweets, it can incite violence.
John Garamendi. Congressman, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Coming up for us, you're going to want to hear what former White House counsel Don McGhan says that then President Donald Trump demanded that he do. This came in testimony behind closed doors, what he told lawmakers about why he called Trump's request a point of no return. Trapped, facing the point of no return. That is how former White House counsel Don McGhan described feeling when President Trump directed him to fire special counsel Robert Mueller. Those details are just one part of the transcript from McGahn's closed-door testimony before the House Judiciary Committee, which was released Wednesday. CNN's Lauren Fox is joining me now from Capitol Hill with more on this. Lauren, what more are you learning from these transcripts? And honestly, what is the reaction from lawmakers?
Well, this was a hard-fought interview. If you remember, Kate, Democrats from the House have been trying to get McGhan to sit down with them for 2 years. Obviously, that court battle ended in a negotiation between the Justice Department and House Democrats. McGhan testified last week behind closed doors, and this transcript really reveals exactly sort of why he was so concerned when he was the White House counsel. He basically told the committee much of what he told Robert Mueller's team. Remember, he sat down 5 different times for interviews, that he was very uncomfortable when the president, or then President Trump, asked him to direct a message to the attorney general, or the acting attorney general at the time, to fire the special counsel. And I want to read an excerpt of that testimony. He said, quote, "If the acting attorney general received what he thought was a direction from the counsel to the president to remove a special counsel, he would either have to remove the special counsel or resign," McGhan said. "We are still talking about the Saturday Night Massacre decades and decades later." McGhan told House Democrats and House Republicans behind closed doors that
I got you, you got me, we're all good.
Seems that we've lost the connection with Lauren Fox. Lauren Fox on Capitol Hill, thank you so much, dealing with technical gremlins as always. Let's move to this, though. As the summer travel season is ramping up in a big way, the TSA is warning that it faces a major labor shortage. The agency is urgently trying to recruit thousands of new workers. It's even asking office employees to volunteer in some of the nation's largest airports, raising new questions about what this means for long lines and delays at airports across the country, and also what it means for the safety and security of everyone traveling. CNN's Pete Muntean joining me now for more on this. Pete, what are you hearing about this shortage?
You know, Kate, it's an interesting ask to keep up with this rising air travel demand coming back a bit sooner than the air travel industry expected. Take a look at these numbers from the TSA. It screened 1.67 million people at airports across the country just yesterday, shy of the pandemic record of 1.98 million people screened on Sunday. That is the highest number we have seen since March of 2020, even higher than the numbers over this past Memorial Day weekend. And now this is what's so interesting from the TSA. It is asking its office staff to come out to those security checkpoints at airports across the country to help keep these travelers moving. Now, the TSA does have a hiring goal of hiring 6,000 security workers by the end of the summer, by Labor Day. So far, it's hired about 3,100 people so far, so about halfway to that goal. The acting TSA administrator says it is on pace to meet that goal, and an official from the TSA tells us that this maneuver will help out for now. Here's what the TSA said.
As we approach Labor Day, we'll meet or exceed our goal of 6,000 officers to staff the nation's airports. I'm confident in reporting that TSA is prepared and well positioned to help ensure that everyone who wishes to travel will do so safely and securely.
Now, these TSA volunteers are not doing the actual security screening, more so helping out with the peripheral duties like moving those plastic bins and keeping lines flowing. But remember, there are real risks to transportation security workers. You know, just the other day, cruise ship passengers on a cruise ship in Italy tested positive for COVID, and they're required to be tested before, during, and after their trip. 8,000 TSA employees have tested positive for COVID. Only 16 have died, but still some real risks out there, Kate.
Absolutely. Pete, thank you for staying on top of this for us. Appreciate it. Coming up for us, at this hour, a big step in the effort to vaccinate young children. Right now, a group of FDA advisors is meeting to discuss the next steps for getting the green light to vaccinate kids under the age of 12. So what happens now? Joining me now is Dr. Jorge Rodriguez, CNN medical analyst and viral specialist. Dr. Rodriguez, thank you for being here. What do you think the FDA needs to consider when making these decisions about vaccinating kids younger than 12? We've seen this process every step of the way. What does it mean for the youngest of kids?
Well, the main two things that the FDA needs to consider, and I'm sure they will, is safety of the vaccines for children of under 12, and also the efficacy to make sure that the vaccines work and that they cause no harm. It's going to be a little bit more difficult in children than in adults. First of all, the circumstances. Right now, the United States is one of its lowest levels of COVID infections, so you really can't test two arms, people with placebo and people with the vaccine, and see who gets sick, because chances are not many are going to get sick to be statistically significant. So what they're going to be looking at is how the immune system of these children respond to COVID. Do they have neutralizing antibodies? And since there aren't going to be probably many children in these studies, they're going to have to look at what statistics are going to be important. So basically, they are setting the groundwork today to see exactly what is going to be necessary to interpret data that is going to come out in the future to make sure that it is safe and effective for children.
And let's jump forward. Let's assume that this moves forward and there will be eventually a vaccine approved for kids under the age of 12. What is the biggest impact of having a vaccine for children under 12? We've talked so often about, yes, these kids can get sick and they can get very sick, but they are much less vulnerable than many other populations.
That's correct. So far, thank God, they have been less vulnerable. But children are also reservoirs of the virus, and they can spread. And we don't know exactly how this is going to play out this fall with what might be a new surge. There are approximately 70 million young adults under the age, I think, of 17, and almost 50 million under the age of 12. So that is a huge reservoir. If everybody else gets vaccinated, percentage-wise, children are going to be the most susceptible section of our population to get COVID. So we need to protect them first and foremost.